Welcome to the Animal Turn podcast. I'm very excited to have you on. I'm a huge fan of your work. I've followed your photos for a long, long time. So you said animal photojournalism, like it didn't have a name, so it wasn't really a thing, which is quite interesting because when you think about photos, I think we've got relatively you think about photos and animals, maybe you're thinking about like lions in the savannah
Yes.
or like polar bears on ice caps. You've got very kind of specific images that you have in mind when you think about animals in photos, and they're often tourism images or conservation images. But what you do at We Animals Media is very different. So maybe you could tell us what is animal photojournalism?
Yes, it is quite different from what you've just mentioned and the animals you've mentioned. We're quite comfortable looking at charismatic animals. National Geographic has taught us to welcome visuals of animals on the savannah, for example, into our homes. We know that they have A.P.L.E, but we're not afraid of it. So we're not afraid of wildlife photography. It's not too controversial for us. And same with conservation photography as well. And then there are, there's like pet portraiture, images of companion animals, and all of these ways that we photograph animals that uh, feel acceptable to us. But there are a lot of animals who go completely unseen in the world, but we have a very close relationship with them, much closer than the animals on the savannah. And they are the animals that we wear and the animals we eat, animals who are used in labs. We use medicine that's been tested on them, and even the animals that are a little more visible, those who are used in entertainment, rodeos, zoos, circuses, bullfights, and so on. Now, it's a lot more it's a lot less comfortable for us to look at these animals because we have a direct relationship in like the quality of their lives, or the abject suffering and cruelty inflicted on them. And that is because of us. And so we certainly have a lot of defenses when it comes to looking at these animals, confronting their lives. These images ask questions of us. These images are a mirror, really.
Mhm.
If I show you an image of a chicken, a layer hen in a factory farm in a cage, stuffed into a cage, and she can't even spread her wings, there might be part of us that cares about that individual the way we might care about other animals, but it calls upon us to like think about our egg eating, for example, and our defenses go up, and it makes it very difficult for people to actually look at the images and stay with the images and contemplate the images. So it's quite an uphill battle, actually,
Mm.
this animal photojournalism that we coined.
Yeah, because I mean, it's really interesting because it makes me think now. You drew a parallel, um, or at least kind of your backstory is one of trying to get into kind of conflict photography and finding yourself in animal photojournalism, and both are really quite violent. Um, but do you kind of think that there's a similar kind of defensiveness when it comes to war photography? Does the public is the public as readily accepting of the kind of violence that they see in conflict images? Of course, we've got histories like the Vietnam photography completely changed the
Yes.
outcome of that war and the ways in which the American public understood that conflict. Uh, but do you think that that's changed over time?
Hmm. I think that it remains easier to look at humanitarian conflicts and war photography, because for the most part, we're looking at something happening, quote unquote, over there.
Hmm.
Of course, economies tie us and bind us all, but nevertheless, we still have this geographical sense of like, that's over there, or that's a minority population, or we are better than them for some reason or another, or yeah, and I also think that, um, so there's an otherness, but also we may not also feel directly responsible for the suffering of others if there's, a war happening. I keep saying quote unquote over there. I'm doing like the air quotes. Um, but we can also do things like volunteer and donate
Hmm.
to these causes, and that makes us feel good, and it should,
Hmm.
and we should do everything that we can to help humans in conflict. but it is really fundamentally, it is less personal than looking at the animals who are
Yeah.
involved in our daily lives that we're causing direct suffering to.
This makes me think a bit of Dinesh Wadiwell's kind of idea of the war against animals. Because I mean, I get your point. If you're not a part of a specific conflict situation and it's a place other than where you are, it's easy to kind of think that you're removed from that. But kind of meat eating is global, wearing of animals is everywhere. So it's a lot more dispersed. And I understand the kind of proclivity to want to turn away from those images. But if there is this kind of will to turn away from images that show this kind of exploitation, uh, and you say you're fighting an uphill battle, how do you win that battle? How do you make people see the image when they are inundated with images?
Hmm. Well, you are asking the question that we ask ourselves at We Animals Media every single day. And that's the question that many types of activists are asking themselves: how to get people to not turn away, whether you're in the courtroom or in the schoolroom, how to get people to engage. And I think that there are roots that need to be examined and tackled. I mean, I could talk about superficially, sorry, I could talk about looking at images, which actually is something quite superficial, and how to get
Mhm.
people to look at images. But why are we so defensive? Why won't we look? Well, it's because of our culture and traditions. And I think a different kind of education is needed for us globally, one in which that we are more curious and more open and more social and
Mm.
more socially responsible. And those haven't typically been a focus in education. So before
Yeah.
we look at difficult images, we need like some internal groundwork that needs to be taught. But we're not there, and
But
so yeah.
I really do think your images, though, kind of compel people to think differently. Perhaps because I do think that there's a way in which some images can objectify animals and possibly objectify animals' violence, right? But there's in many of the photographs that are taken by We Animals Media, I find that there's a tendency of kind of really trying to understand the animal in the photograph. So you're positioning, oftentimes, whether it's one animal or many animals, you're trying to position their experience, right? It's not just some sort of like abject violence or that's detached. Oftentimes you've got really kind of personal, I think, framing where you're seeing a specific cow in a transport trailer, their eye poking out, for example. And it's done with really high quality. It's not just kind of a snapshot, which really grabs, I think, attention and compels, at least me, it compels me to really stop and think about that cow or that pig. And yeah, maybe that's part of that education, right?
I'm glad you said that and you've noticed that, because really what we are trying to do in animal photojournalism is show the individual, but show the context as well. I find a lot of animal pictures not very useful to the animals historically, especially portraiture, especially images that are so clearly taken for our enjoyment. And yeah, so APJ, animal photojournalism, I'll probably continue to use the acronym, is to, yeah, show the individual and show the context. So we want to show the bars, the darkness, the feces they're standing on, the dead bodies of cage mates, and so on. The realities of how they're living and how they are dying.